Okay. What a great way to start a share with a cough. Okay, so let's see. We'll go over here. It's just loading up. Okay, perfect. Zok Tahil Gemara. Ah, Dovi. Good morning, Dovi. Perfect. Just come. So we're up to the two dots on Mem Gimel Amar Aleph. Chutz min ha'almana. So the Gemara, the Mishnah quoted the Tanakama, who held that no one is allowed to marry within 3 months after another marriage. It doesn't make a difference if it was a Basula, Ba'ula, an Erisin, and a Sun. Rabbi Yehuda said there's only an issue when we have a problem of a concern for a pregnancy. So if someone was an Almanim and an Erisin, so there's no chance that she got pregnant, then she could even make the Sun right away. And if someone was an Almanim and a Nisuin, where she might be pregnant, then she's allowed to become an Harusa right away, and they just have to hold off on the Nisuin. And then there was a third sheet, the RYosy, who said that an Almana, regardless, cannot do Erisin. The reason why an Almana, regardless, cannot do Erisin with evil, because she shouldn't be remarrying while the body's still warm. So Amar Reb Chisda. Reb Chisda said, we have a problem with Reb Yosi. Kal v'chomer. I'll bring you a kal v'chomer that it should be mutter for an almana to do erisin, and we shouldn't have to worry about evil. We shouldn't have to worry that she's sort of having a celebration, doing something happy, while she should be babelis. Because umaba mokim she'asur l'chabis, madach under 9 days, where it's also to wash your clothing, mutter le'aris, you're allowed to do erisin on Tisha B'Av. I'm sorry, during the 9 days. During the 9 days, one is allowed to do erisin. And the Poskim Paskin that even a small engagement party is allowed during the 9 days. Nevertheless, Mokum shemuter l'chavis, a woman who is allowed to wash her clothing during the shloshim, Einodin, I don't mean during the shloshim, I mean during the 3 months after she would terminate a marriage, Einodin shemuter li'arish, surely she should be able to make erisin. So this kal v'chomer is a challenge to what Rabbi Yosi said.
And the veils are the same.
I'm sorry?
Who said the level of veils is the same in the 9 days and someone who's a noble?
So that's a very, very good question. And the end of the Gemara, the final comment of the Gemara will be precisely that. Who said you could compare the rules of Avelis during the 9 days to the rules of Avelis of someone who loses her husband? So in the Chadami, it's a very good svar. It would be the shmak if we go straight to that svar. We don't have to go through all the complicated Gemaras in between that the Gemara is going to abandon. So first we go through a whole complicated cheshbon that the Gemara is going to eventually abandon and then come up to your svar. Kal v'chomer, Reb Chisda matmiya al divrei Reb Yosi. Reb Chisda is asking a kasha on the words of Reb Yosi, she'oiser le'ores machmas avelos kol lamed. Because of avelos, for 30 days, he doesn't allow her to make an erisin, ketikatani l'kamon, kami ibul shalosh shloshim. Okay. It's also the Chabes, Shabbos Echol Tisha B'Av Lios B'Seicha, which we refer to as the 9 days. The Svardim only limited to the week that Tisha B'Av is in. And Mutter le'aris, the Erisin lav simcha. Rashi tells us that Erisin is not a simcha. Makam shemutter lechabes, toich lamed yom shalevel. During the shloshim, you're allowed to wash. You're not allowed to do gihuts, which is a higher level of pressing and whitening, but regular washing is allowed during the shloshim. Okay, so Zok Gemara, Mahi, where do you know these halachas that you're telling us that you're allowed to wash or that you're allowed to make erisin during the 9 days? It's none. Shabbos Shechol Tisha B'Av B'Seicha, which we refer to as the 9 days. Also l'saper, you're not allowed to take haircuts. U'lechabes, and to wash. U'lechamishi muter b'tikfayra Shabbos. On Thursday it would be muter al tzchavit Shabbos. But Tanya we learned choydem azman hazeh, before this period of time, which Rashi tells us that at this point we think it means because l'kadaita choydem Tisha B'Av. The Hanu kol haShabbos shechol yos b'seicha. So once again, before Tisha B'Av, during the 9 days, ha'am memaitin b'eskeim, they limit their work, their business ventures, milisa v'litain, from doing business, masomatan, milivnois, unataya, from building and planting. And Taisa says this is referring specifically to building structures that are made to celebrate simchas and planting trees that are made for simchas, like to create for a king a big area of shade. Uma arson, and you're allowed to do arson. Avaloy coins, and you're not allowed to do nesuin. They know you sudas arson. You're not allowed to make the party. So you clearly see that in doing arson is not a contradiction to Avelis. So why is it that the RYosy outlaws it? The Brisa that we just quoted that outlaws, that allows arison during the 9 days, it doesn't mean during the 9 days. It's koidim the koidim. And if we look at Rashi at the bottom line, Rashi's koidim Shabbos shechol Tisha B'Av b'Soicha. So that would be the level before, which we would refer to as the 3 weeks. The hazel muter l'chabitz. During the 3 weeks, you're allowed to wash clothing. Avotoicha Shabbos, but in the 9 days itself, kishem she'asher l'chabitz asher nami l'aris v'leka kal v'chomer. So we've undermined the entire basis of the kal v'chomer. Was all hinged on the fact that you're allowed to wash clothing. But Dr. Gemara, you're talking not allowed to wash clothing during the 9 days. And when are you allowed to wash? Dafka b'kodim the kodim. Correct Gemara, that doesn't help us anything. That just shifts our kal v'chomer, and now we make a different kal v'chomer. Amarava the kodim nami kal v'chomer. Umaba makom she'aser lisa v'lite mutali ares madich in a place where it's usher to do business. Because it says over here, during the 3 weeks, so madich, you're supposed to minimize your business during the 3 weeks. Nevertheless, in that same period of time, it says you're allowed to do arison, which means a woman who lost her husband is allowed to do business. Surely she should be able to do arison. So because of this, we have a problem with RYosy Shita, who says that a woman may not do arison, because there's no reason why arison should be a problem with her avails. So the Gemara is going to propose to say that RYosy Pshat and RYosy changes. And loy tema RYosy Omer kol hanoshim yisarsu except for an almana, el ema kol hanoshim yinasu except for an almana. Now that causes a massive change, because now RYosy is saying every woman, even a woman who was in a Nesua until now, can do Nesuin right away without waiting for 3 months. The only reason why one wouldn't do that is because of Avelis. So only an Almana wouldn't be able to do because of Avelis. But everyone else could get married right away, even though they were in Nesua, they can make Nesuin right away, which means he's not worried about determining who's the father of his child. Correct, Gemara. Are you actually suggesting that RYosy holds the less lay? RYosy lahafrin? Are you going to say that RYosy is not concerned about this concept of knowing with clarity who the father of a child is? So the more Iba say, in one lashon, you could say, yeah, less lay. As a matter of fact, he's not worried. He's worried about Avelis, but he's not worried about Avchaga. That's one shot. He is concerned about it. So we're going to have to now make more of a twist to explain RYosy. So this is where it starts getting a little complicated. The Ema, let's say, RYosy Omer, Kol Arusois Gerushois Yinasu. Let's say that what RYosy said is any Arusa who's a Gerusha can get married right away because she's an Arusa, so there's no problem of a pregnancy, except for an Arusa who became an Almana, she can't do Nesuin. Why can't she do Nesuin? Because of Avelis. So that's what we're saying now. But that comes with a whole slew of problems. The first problem that comes with is that's not what he said. So if we look back to the Mishnah, we're completely changing the words of RYosy, because the Mishnah says in RYosy kol hanoshim yisarsu chutz v'nalmana. We're changing that. It's kol hanoshim yinasu. It says the kol harusois gerushois yinasu. So we're completely changing the words of the Mishnah. Instead of kol hanoshim yisarsu, It's called RYosy Simon. So we're sort of totally rewriting the Mishnah. So that's not a problem, but it's important to note that the Gemara is taking that liberty to change the words of RYosy, which will come into play a little bit later. And the second problem is, if that's the case, everybody agrees, even Rabbi Yehuda agrees, that Nisuin is not allowed by Avelos. So now there's not much of a distinction between Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Yehuda. If Rabbi Yosi was saying a chiddush that an arusa, you're not allowed to do erison when you're Avelos, that's a chiddush. It's such a big chiddush that it doesn't even jive with the Kavachimer. But to say that one may not do Nisuin in Avelos, that's not a chiddush. Everybody agrees to that. So then, in fact, he's saying exactly the same halacha as Rabbi Yehuda. In what way is Rabbi Yosi different than Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda held that any woman who didn't have a chance of pregnancy could get married. So an arusa could do Nisuin right away, and Nesua can do erison right away, and a Nesua, and Nisuin is not allowed during a period of Avelos. That's exactly what Rabbi Yehuda said. So now that you've modified Rabbi Yosi, he says precisely the same thing as Rabbi Yehuda. That cannot be, because clearly he's arguing. I'm sorry? What about Rabbi Yehuda? Right. Where we say that, right, so that everybody agrees to that. Because the Rusa was considered a Nesua because it's possible that they had relations.
And Rabbi didn't talk about Avelos.
You're right, he didn't. Rashi speaks out that it's possible that everybody would agree that Nesuin would be usher. So you cannot say that Rabbi Yehuda says that you're allowed to make Nesuin Avelos. That seems to be unanimous. The question is if you can make erison. So Zoktamar Ika Benayu, there's still a difference in halacha between Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Yehuda, and that is Nesua le'aris. And Nesua to get erison. Rabbi Yehuda suffered Nesua mutaras le'aris. Rabbi Yehuda holds that a Nesua could make erison because erison will not lead to a pregnancy. Rabbi Yosi suffered Nesua asura le'aris. So Rabbi Yosi has a chumrah that a Nesua may not do erison. So if you look back to the way we modified the words of Rabbi Yosi on the third line of the Amid, Rabbi Yosi is called Arusais Gerushais Yinasu, but a Nesua may not do erison. So what he's saying is, even though an Arusa, we're not going to be geyser, because since there's no chance that she's pregnant, therefore we'll even let her make Nesuin. But on erisin we are geyser. So in the Nesua, to make erisin, we're geyser. Why? Because we're afraid that if she does erisin, she might end up doing Nisuin. And therefore, we don't let her do erisin either. So that's, at this stage of the Gemara's proposal as to what the machlokes is between Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Yehuda. So it's so ironic that it seemed what jumped out of the page at us from Rabbi Yosi's words were a shaila of Avelos. And this step of the Gemara is twisting around Rabbi Yosi's words. And the shaila has nothing to do with Avelos. And the whole shaila is, if after Nesuin, you can do erison. Right? So it's not a comfortable shot, but that's what the Gemara is saying at this point.
Yes,
Correct the Gemara, the Shav Rabbi Yosi, Nesua, Asura le'aris, and Dubi's tearing his hair out. Why couldn't the Gemara just have started off with my svara? It would have been so much more simple. I don't know, but the trip to get to your svara, it's like family circle.
No, Yossi.
Get to your destination.
Sorry, Yossi.
Yeah.
Just taking one step back, and the Nesua, the reason why we hold back on Nesua for 3 months, is that a gezerah, or what is that?
We're concerned that if she becomes pregnant right away, we won't know the child.
Okay, so that's not a gezerah, that's just
it's a practical concern. Okay, so let's see the Gemara. Rabbi Yosi Savar and the Nesua Asuli Ares. I'm sorry, that's how the Gemara figured out. For example, Savar Rabbi Yosi, Nesua Asuli Ares. Is that how you want to understand Rabbi Yosi? That a Nesua cannot do erison? I'll prove to you that he doesn't hold that. The Vatanya we looked at Brisa, which elaborates on what Rabbi Yosi said. And the Brisa says, Rabbi Yosi Omer, Kol HaNoshim Yisarsu. All women are allowed to do erison, chutz min almana, if they're able. So this is pretty explicit. In fact, that even women who did who are Nesuos are allowed to do Erusin, which is contrary to what we want to attribute to Rabbi Yosi. And then he goes on, the Chama Ibul Shalosh Shloshim Yain, and then again, the Chulan Lo Yinasu Achi Yulam Gibul Chadoshim. They're not allowed to make Nesuin, but Mashma Erusin they're allowed to make. So we have a brisa that elaborates in Rabbi Yosi that's mashma from the Reisha that everyone could do Erusin, and in the Sefer it's mashma that you can't do Nesuin, which you could be medayik, but Erusin you could make. So we have a brisa that strongly shows that Rabbi Yosi argues. This brisa is not fair to us at all. If you're concerned about the fact that it says black and white in the brisa, just like on the third line of our Amid, we totally rewrote the Mishnah, so we'll totally rewrite the brisa. If I can rewrite Mishnah, I can rewrite brises, so we can totally reword it. Hachanami kol harusos gerushos hinasu elomi seifa. But from the seifa, it's more difficult to squeeze out of the question. And we can die in Suvi Hudalai Isruse Jabradam. So there, why can't you switch those wording around as well? Right? It's a good question. If you could switch wording, switch that wording. Zogt Rashi, you can't. Why can't you? Zogt Rashi says beautiful. Why you cannot get out of that? Because it says over here, V'chulam, where does he say? He says, oh, here it is. Rashi here says, V'chulam. Can you see Rashi about an inch up for the Mishnah? V'chulam hanasua is lo yinasu, afilu gerusha, the leki evil, the chashin lav chana. Elam is seifa, the ketani v'chulam lo yinasu. Dal korchach and the suas lo yinasu kai. When it says v'chulam lo yinasu, it means it's going on in the suas lo yinasu kai. Why? The ukma reisha arusa shinasu. We've already said the halacha that an arusa is allowed to do nesuin. So therefore, you cannot just reword the second half of the brisa and make it mirror the first half of the brisa, because that's repetitive. It has to be teaching us a new halacha that the reisha of this brisa was not referring to. So therefore, since the ukma reisha arusa shinasu, the reisha we already said means that arusais could do nesuin. So then the nesuais, hilchach seifa on the nesuais kai. The seifa has to be referring to the nesuais because the brisa already addressed the status of arusais. The katani lo yinasu. It says lo yinasu in the seifa of the brisa. The v'in nafchana aval asrusei shapridami. Since we can't say it means arusa shinasi because we can't change it to that because that's what it says in the Reisha. So this must be telling you a new halacha that arusais could do the sun. So therefore we're stuck over here. Zog to Gemara, we have another way out. Amarava tritz ve'emahachi. This is what I'll try to answer. Rabbi Yosi says, Kol arusais gerushais yinasu. All arusais who are gerushais can get married, could even do nisuin, because there's no problem of availus. Chutz min ha'almana, except for a widow, mipnei evil. The kama evil shalah shloshim yain, and the availus lasts for 30 days, where she cannot do nisuin. Unisuais, and people who are nesuos, lo yisarsu, shouldn't do erusin, ad shehelon shloisha chadashim, because of avchada. So now we have a solution for Pshat and Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yosi says, arusos, gerushos, yinasu, that is an agreement. That is an agreement with Rabbi Yehuda. Chutz min almana, who cannot do nesuin if they're evil, that's also in agreement with Rabbi Yehuda, but where he departs from Rabbi Yehuda is unesuais lo yisarsu, while Rabbi Yehuda allows a nesua to do erusin Rabbi Yosi does not allow a Nesua to do Erisin, Ad Shehelam Shloisha Chadash. So that's where we want to remain at this point. Fact Gemara, we have to analyze the whole premise. We're talking about an almana mina erisin. We said a moment ago that an almana mina erisin is not allowed to do nesuin for how long? For 30 days. Fact Gemara, almana mina erisin mi isla ibol. A woman who died, a woman whose husband dies, and she was not a nesua, she was only a nerusa. Does she have halachas of avelus towards her husband, who she wasn't fully married to? We'll prove to you that there are no halachas of avelus on a marriage, on a spouse, if it's not nesua. Because Vatani we learned, Reb Chia bar Ami taught us that ishtoi arusa, if the woman is only arusa and she's not nesua, loy oinen, v'loy mitamela. He does not become an oinen for her, and if he's a kohen, he's not allowed to become tomei to deal with her burial. And she would not be an oinen, meaning if she was a bas kohen, she'd be able to eat truma. She's not obliged to deal with his burial. Mesa, if she dies and she's only in a rusa, in a yarshu, he doesn't even get her yerusha because she's not in the stu yet. But mesu goy b'ksubasa because there's special allowances in the ksuba for that. So you see clearly that a woman who's in a rusa doesn't have to follow the halachas of avelus when her husband dies. So why is it that Rabbi Yosi, how could you argue here that Rabbi Yosi says that a woman who is merely in a rusa cannot become a nesua because of avelus? Clearly, she doesn't subscribe to the halachas of avelus. Elos up to Gemara. Let's completely ignore the entire Gemara that we learned since the beginning of the Amid. And let's go back to the drawing board. What did we have all the way at the beginning? We had a kasha on Rabbi Yosi. You, Rabbi Yosi, how could you say that a woman that is in the Nesua is not allowed to do Erisin? Because Erisin is a violation of Avelus. We have a raya from Tisha B'Av that Erisin is not a violation of Avelus. Zok to Gemara, that's a machlokes tanoim. Rabbi Yosi holds that Erisin is a violation of Avelus, and I'll show you a Tana who actually holds that Erisin is a violation of Avelus. So on this brayso that the Gemara brought on the Daf Mem Gimel Lamed Aleph, indeed it says that Erisin is not a violation of Avelus. But Rabbi Yosi argues with it. Tanoi, it's a machlokes tanoim. The Tanya, Merish Chodesh, we add Merish Chodesh Varatainis, from Merish Chodesh until the Tainis, which we call 9 days. Ha'am Memaitin Ma'iskeim, Miliso Militein, Milivlos V'Nataya, Umile Ares. They don't do Erisin. So you see, I have a brayso here who says that Erisin is a contradiction to Havelos. Umilisa. Shabbos Shachal Tisha B'Av B'Seicha, also L'Saper U'Lechabes. The Yeshayim Kol HaChodesh also. So you have over here a support for a different shita that Erisin does contradict, is not consistent with Havelos, and maybe that's what Rabbi Yosi holds. Maska for Rabashi. Rabashi asks, how could you prove from this brayso that you're allowed to do Erisin? Maybe what it's talking about is Mimai de Li'aris Mamish, Dilma L'Me'evet Sudas Erisin Hu Aser. Holy Aris Shapardam. From this brayso, when it says Umile Aris, maybe it doesn't mean the actual ceremony, maybe it means the party. Correcting Gemara, that wouldn't be logical because it also says Umilisa. It's answering the suit. So Yachi Milisa, are you going to say Linase Nami Lemevet Sudas Nasuna the Aser Halisa Shapardami? Are you going to tell me that by the Nasun it also means the Suda, but you're allowed to make the Nasun when we know across the board that Nasun itself, just the ceremony of the Nasun itself, is a contradiction, is not consistent with the Velos? So tomorrow, no, there's a compelling reason to learn Erisin means the party, and Nesuin means the actual ceremony. Why? Nesuin without the Suda, we know there's a simcha there, and therefore it alone, the ceremony alone, should be prohibited during Avelis. And the Erisin below Suda, Mika Simcha, there's no simcha there at all. So you're forced to learn that there, that means the Suda. So this theory now is also wiped out. El Rabashi, now we say Duvi Svara. Shiny Avelis Chadashim Avelis Yeshana. Yes, the Avelis of Tisha B'Av, which is an old Avelis, the Beis Hamikdash was horrible many years ago. There, maybe Erishin is allowed, but a new Avelis, a woman just lost her husband, that's much, much more severe. And therefore, she would not be able to engage even in an Erishin. Or V'shayni Avelis, the Rabbim Avelis, the Yochid. There's a big difference between a communal tragedy, like losing the Beis Hamikdash, and the personal tragedy of losing a loved one. And losing a loved one would warrant a much higher level of Avelos, a much more stringent level of Avelos than what we do for the 9 days for Tisha B'Av. It's interesting because they always tell you, would you shave during Shiva? Right? So how could you shave during 9 days? You see here, Klar from the Gemara, there's a svara that when you lose a loved one, there's an inyan for it to be more chomer. I'm not looking to get into trouble, but I'm just pointing out that you see a svara here in the Gemara, which seems to be the svara that the Gemara remains with in the understanding of Rabbi Yehuda, that even an arusa, even doing erishin, is not allowed during a personal avelis, because the avelis to yachid and the avelis chadasha is much more severe, and even doing erishin would not be allowed.
What's the source of this comment that
Because it's just a monetary transaction.
What do you say in here?
But the suin means you're actually taking her in. You're starting to live with her. So that's a simcha, because you're starting your life together. But it's interesting that you bring it up, because there's actually a shayla about it. What's the halacha if the chos and kala don't wash by shaver brachos? So do you say that they could still have the simcha of shaver brachos? Because it's not considered a suda if they're not washing. But could you say it's still considered shaver brachos because they still have the happiness of the nesuin, even though they don't have the suda? And the place kapaskin, of course, let's say for some reason a chosn and a kala cannot wash. They're not lactose intolerant, but they can't. They're people who can't eat wheat. They have to be gluten free. Oh, that was the word for it. What was the word? Celiac. So they couldn't eat grain. So because of that, they can't wash. So does that mean they can't make shaver brachos? So the person comes, how do they can make shaver brachos? Because they still have the simchas nesuin, because they don't need the suda for the simcha. Everybody else can wash. Okay, so let's see the commission divider. Arba achin nesuin arba noshim. There are 4 brothers, and they were married to 4 women, and the women were not related, other than the fact that they were sisters-in-law. Umesu, they all died. So im ratza hagadol shebem yabim es kulam pershus biyadei. If the oldest wants to do yibam, he could. The problem is if they're all dead, who's doing yibam? So that's going to be the first Gemara's kasha. And the Gemara's going to say, oops, we forgot to mention that there were more brothers as well. So then the oldest of the surviving brothers, he can do yibam on all 4 of the women if he wants. Misha Yanasui l'shtei nashim umeis. If someone was married to 2 of them and he died, so you don't need to do yibam or chalitza on both of his wives. It's enough to do yibam or chalitza on one of his wives. We've had this many times in the Masechta. Now we're going to Mendel. Let's say one of these women was a gerusha, because before the deceased married her, she was divorced from somebody else, which means she would not be able to marry a kohen. So one of the deceased wives, one of the almanas, was a gerusha that would be usher to a kohen, and one of the deceased wives was only an almana, and she could technically remarry a kohen. So in haya choylitz, if you're doing chalitza, choylitz for psula, do chalitza on the gerusha, because a kohen midarabanan is not allowed to marry a chalutza. So if you have a woman who's an almana who could technically marry a kohen, so her field of prospects is wide open, don't give her chalitza and mess her up. Give chalitza to the woman who anyway couldn't marry a kohen. Don't spoil her. So therefore, if you do yibam, you could do yibam on either one. But chalitza only do on the woman who anyway couldn't marry a kohen. This way, the other almana will still be able to marry a kohen. What? You have no choice. You have to give a chalitza. You have to give her more chalitza.
Kedusha, then became an almana, and the brothers okay.
No, we're not talking about the brothers who have them. We're talking about regular Yisraelim. But a woman who lost her husband, now she's going to have to shop around for a new husband in the open marketplace. So we don't want to reduce her chances. I said over last time that I know somebody who became a Balchuva in Nesha Torah, and most of the girls who become Balchuvas when they're teenagers have the status of a Zoina because they typically had slept around. Most non-formed teenagers have slept around, which means they're permanently disqualified from marrying Kohanim. So if there was a girl available who they knew didn't sleep around, that girl would be very coveted by the Kohanim, because a boy who becomes a Balchuva, if he's a Kohen, it's very hard for him to find a shidduch, because he can only marry a girl who he knows without a doubt. So either he has to marry an FFB, or even if it's not an FFB, it has to be somebody who knows for sure didn't ever have an issue. And a friend of mine, he married a girl who it was known about her that she was a Basula. And his friends, Kohanim, were upset with him. You could have married any woman. Why do you have to take this girl? So he's like, what do you want from me? So he said, ready this year, I went out with her and it worked out. But there is this thing that it's not so easy to find shidduchim. So this is very real. This is up to Hiluk Gemara. There are only four brothers. If there's only four brothers, who's doing the evil. Four of the brothers died, but of course there were more brothers. RYosy Simon Yevamos. The Satmar Rebbe was a very practical person, and he didn't like these fake, phony Chassidish mices. So he once said over a story referring to Chassidish mices that there was once a band of 10 robbers. 5 of the robbers would go out and rob people, and the other five robbers, they kept the base camp. They cooked, they cleaned, they did money laundering, they did the financing, and it was a good partnership. One day, the people that are going out, the 5 guys who are going to pull off a heist, they said, we risk our lives day in, day out. We risk our lives day in, day out to rob people. We can be killed. And when we come back, it's like they own the house and we're guests there. They push us around, and we're doing all the work. Today, we're fed up with them. We're going to come back at the end of the day. We're going to gun them all down. We're going to kill them, and then we'll deal with the back end work. I don't need them anymore. Meantime, back at the ranch, the 5 guys who were running the back end says, you know what, a chutzpah, those guys come in and make believe like they own the place, that they're heroes, and we're just their schleppers, we're just their service people. We're going to teach them a lesson. We're going to poison them. We're going to poison their food. They'll all die, and we'll take over. So what happened? At the end of the day, they pull off a heist. They came back to the base station. They gunned down all of the 5 guys who were there, and they eat the food, and then they all died. Who was alive to say over this story? He's always asked that question. Okay. So the halacha is, he could do yibum on 4 women. Are you actually going to let him pull such a suicidal move that he should marry 4 women? Latanya, we learned, the cover zikna, right? The Brisa Darshans, the pasuk that's referring to the story of Yibum, the Zikna Irai column, and we learn from there. And this is not relevant to our sugya, but we're going through the Brisa. Hein v'lo shlucham. This is something that the Dayanim have to deal with personally. They can't have the Shlich Bezdin talk and arrange this chalitza. They speak with him. What do they speak to him about? They help him make the decision between chalitza and yibum using logic of what would be a good idea, what would work. If he was very young and she was very old, or Huzak when he was old, then they tell him, you're an old man, what are you going to do? You're going to marry this young woman, it's going to be a disaster. You're a young guy, you're going to marry this old lady, again, it's going to be a disaster. Pick on someone your own size. Go find somebody that's more appropriate. Give this woman chalitza. Don't get into a marriage which is only going to lead to trouble. So how could Besdin let him marry 4 women? That's for sure going to lead to trouble. So how could our Mishnah say that they let him? So the Efshalei, we're talking about a wealthy guy. He's very wealthy, and he can afford 4 wives. So therefore, it is a non-issue here. So why does the Mishnah say a number of 4? The Mishnah should have said even up to 100. It's an Eitz Taiva to a person not to take more than 4 wives. Why? So that he can at least be intimate with each of his wives once a month. And Rashi tells us, how do you get to that cheshbon? That because the Talmud Chacham, his oina is once a month. Since his oina is once a month, since it's once a week, so he only has tashmish once a week. So if there's 4 women, he can give each woman tashmish once a month. Now, what happens?
What about the woman? We don't care.
So that's a very interesting point. The post can discuss that. What about from her perspective? Is it enough? So Vaisachos is enough because the Meshach Chachmash tells to this. When Lavan pursued Yaakov, then they had their little scuffle, and then they departed from each other. Lavan told Yaakov, "Promise me imta ana espenoisai. Promise me you won't torture my daughters." And Rashi explains, or maybe it's even the first in the puzzle, that he was saying you should not take on any more wives because you already have 4 wives. You already have Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, and Zilpah, which means that each of my girls are going to have an opportunity once a month. So even Lavan said that's enough for my girls, but don't dilute it further. Don't take on any more wives. I'm sorry? I guess not. Otherwise it goes over. But the Yerushalmi does bring a case where somebody had 8 or 12 wives. In other words, someone did yibum on 8 or 12 women, and that was allowed. But by Zagois, that means he was more available to his wives, and he must have been able to afford it. But there are a lot of talk about this. Okay, let's see the Gemara back there. Misha Hayanas. Somebody was married to 2 wives. One of them was a Grusha, so she could anyway not have married a Kohen, but the other one is only an Almana, so she would be able to marry a Kohen. So we should not do Chalitza to the woman who would be able to marry a Kohen. Why can't you do Yibum to both wives? It's all in singular form. When someone does Yibum, he doesn't do Yibum on all of the wives of the deceased. He only does Yibum with one of the wives of the deceased. Let him do Chalitza on both of them. That should be the halacha, that each of them need Chalitza. Again, Chalitza is also discussed in singular tense. You see the Bach in Beis. Why can't you do Yibum to one of them? Or I'm sorry, I skipped the beginning of the Bach. Why don't you do Chalitza to one wife and Yibum to the other wife? Amakra, the pasuk says, Asher lo yibana, meaning Kivin shelo yibana, shov lo yibana. Since you did Chalitza on one, you could no longer do Yibum on the other one because you already have the lav of lo yibana. So why don't you Yibum first and then do Chalitza on the other one? The pasuk says, Im lo yachbon. The Torah says you only do Chalitza if you didn't want to do Yibum. Hachafetz Yibum. And we learned from there, we had it a couple of days ago as well, that we learned that they work together. A woman who you would have been able to do Yibum upon, on her you'll do Chalitza. But so once he does Yibum on one wife, the next wife he can no longer do Yibum on. Since he could not do Yibum on the next wife, because of bias Echarat the Boina, therefore he doesn't do Chalitza on the second wife either. And there's another complication if he would do Yibum on one wife and Chalitza on the second wife. People are going to say, bias Miktasei Banu or Miktasei Chalitz. People are going to say that this household was half built, meaning he did yibum on one wife, and he did chalitza on another wife. So we don't want people to say that. Let them say that. Why is it a problem? Yeah, let them say that there was yibum on the one, not another. If he did yibum on the first wife and then chalitza on the second wife, yeah, there's no problem with that. But we're concerned if we allow him to do yibum and chalitza, just with the caveat that the yibum has to happen first, well, people might get mixed up. Maybe he'll do it out of order. He'll do chalitza on one wife. Now it's also for him to do yibum. And when he does yibum after the chalitza, become lay below yibum. That's why we say don't do anything. Frank Gemara, maybe you should learn from these psukim that ki ikachata, when there's one wife and it's all singular form, then this guy mitzvah yibum. Only then the Torah say we have to do yibum or chalitza. But ki katarte, maybe in a place where there's two wives, and since the Torah is not speaking in plural fashion, the Torah is only speaking in singular fashion, maybe loy this guy mitzvah yibum. Maybe there should be no such thing as yibum at all. If that's the case, we have psukim to show that the tzarav and erva is also. Why would I need the pasuk to tell you tzarav and erva? Hasha beis ba'alma amrit lav b'nei chalitza v'yibam ninu. You're saying anytime someone has two wives, he's not in the parsha of yibam or chalitza. So tzarav erva boy. Why do I need a pasuk to tell me tzarav erva is both of them are part of yibam? Anytime there's two women, it's part of yibam. What are you talking about? Even though if there would be two wives, we automatically know there's no din yibam. I still need the Torah to teach me that a tzaras erva, you don't make yibam on there. Why? Because I would have thought erva avrei kaima. Once one of the two wives is an erva, so one of the two wives is the daughter of the oven, so now she's completely removed, and we perceive it like there's only one wife. And b'tisyavam terasa. Kamashvula dasira. Kamashvula, no, that we look at it like there's two wives, one of them is also, and therefore they're both also. Ella. So at the end of the day, we have all these questions. How do you know that even if there's multiple wives, there's still a din of yibam? Where do we know it from? So tomorrow, Ella yevimta riba. In the pasuk, it says the word yevimta twice, and that teaches us that even if there's multiple wives, they still have a din yibam chalitza, and we also know that you do yibam or chalitza only on one of those wives. One of the women was kosher, was mutter to a kohen, one not. The chalitza should only be done to the woman who anyway couldn't marry a kohen. RYosy Kan Shana Rebbe, here Rebbe taught us the mitzvah of recycling. Lo yishbach adam meibayrai v'acherim tzrichen lahem. Don't spill out the may of your bar just because you don't need it, but if it's of value to another person, don't throw out something that has no value to you. In other words, Rebbe is the banner of garage sales, right? If you have junk in your basement, don't throw it out because maybe it will be of value to somebody else. And therefore, and this is a life lesson, don't throw things out that could be of value to another person. So just because you could do chalitza on her, but you're messing up kohanim, that they will no longer have access to this woman. Let's see the Gemara weiter. Hamachzer.
So it's not going to have two women, and like the Mishnah said, you do it on the one that functions anyways. The other one is not considered a chalitza?
That's correct. She's considered an almana, and she would be able to marry kohen. Correct. Yeah, exactly correct. Okay, let's see the Mishnah weiter. Hamachzer gerushasei. Someone divorced a woman and then takes her back. Let's see Rashi. Hamachzer gerushasei mishanisses. She had already married somebody else. So this is a marriage that's usher. Or someone who marries the woman who made chalitza. That's also a chai b'labim. Because it says kivin shen loibana, shuv loibana. So once one does chalitza to a woman, he's also to have relations with her. It's no longer a chai v'krisos of eishasach, but there's still a nishalach. Or van noisei kroibes chalutzasei, or someone marries the sister of his chalutza. Like we know midrabanan, the relatives of the chalutza are also also to him. Even the shniyos we learned a couple of days ago. So what if he marries one of these women wrongfully? So the halacha is yoitzi bavlad mamzer. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. These are only chayvei lavin. Yet we consider the child born from a union of chayvei lavin as a mamzer, and that's the sheet of Rabbi Akiva. It's a very radical shita, but that's what he holds. The Chachamim Mairim ain't a vlad mamzer. With this chayvei lavin, the vlad's not a mamzer. But umaydim, they all agree, the noisa krivus gerushasai. If he marries the sister of the woman who he divorced, shahavlad mamzer, because that's a chiyuv kares. Zok the heilige Gemara weiter. The Sava Rebbe achois gerusha midivrei Torah and achois chalutza midiv. I'm sorry, Sava Rebbe Kiva. I didn't read as well. Sava Rebbe Kiva hanois the krivus chalutzasai havlad mamzer. Are you telling me that Rebbe Kiva holds that if you marry a woman who's ushered you with a lav only, the vlad will be a mamzer? The Amar Reish Lakish, didn't Reish Lakish say, we learned it yesterday, Kan Shana Rebbe, in this Mishnah, that makes a clear distinction between a chalutza and a gerusha. Rebbe taught us that a chosh gerusha is midivrei Torah, but a chosh chalutza is midivrei Seifrim. So if that's the case, if it's only also midivrei Seifrim, why would Rabbi Kiva hold that the vlad is mamzer? Memela chayvei lavin, the chalutza herself, the vlad's a mamzer. But even in Isur Rabbanon, the vlad's a mamzer. Zok to Gemara, Tony Kraivas Krushasai. Amend the Mishnah. The Gemara is very happy these days to amend the Mishnahs. So instead of reading the Mishnah saying Kraivas Chalutzasai, Yotzi Vavlad Mamzer, let's say it means Kraivas Krushasai, which is a chiyuv kares, and hachinami mistabra. Regardless of the question we just asked, anyway, it's more logical to say that that's what the Mishnah should be amended to. The Katani Seifa, we learned in the Seifa of this Mishnah, umaydim, everybody agrees, the noitza krivus krishasai, if you married krivus krishasai, shablat mamzer. It's a very interesting point why the Mishnah finishes with this line. I amrit b'shlama. If that was one of the chayvei krisos that was discussed in the Mishnah earlier, it makes sense why the Mishnah mentions that in that case they agree, because it's a case that we were discussing, some in dispute, some not in dispute. So we want to point out that one of the cases earlier is not a dispute. But if you're telling me that krivus chalutzasai is not krivus krushasai, and it's no one even mentioned anything about krivus krushasai up until that point, why in the world would the Mishnah of all cases pick umayda krivus krushasai? What the Mishnah means to say that everybody agrees that if it's a chayvei krisos, it's a vlad as a mamzer. Why of all cases did it pick as an example of a chayvei krisos of krivus krushasai? It could have picked a chaysai, it could have picked chamaysai. There's so many different examples of chayvei krisos. Why of all cases did the Mishnah pick dafka krivus krushasai? The logical explanation is because that's something that was discussed earlier. That's one of the items that Rabbi Akiva had already mentioned is the vlad of mamzer. And even though the Rabbanan argue on the other parts of Rabbi Akiva's statement, the Mishnah wants to point out that there's one point that Rabbi Akiva made that Rabbanan agreed to. In fact, tomorrow that's not a good proof. Oh, you know what? It's 6:42. Let's stop here, and we'll pick this up tomorrow. We're still doing okay. We're still ahead of the game. Okay, shkoich. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Today's daf is Mem Gimel, so we're already halfway through Mem Daled, so we're doing okay. Have a wonderful day.
See you.
Shkoich.